Hey, welcome to week 2 of our I'll Be Happy When series. And so this past week, Pastor John preached. And so before we get into that, quick question. Have you ever bought anything you regretted, or you like, oh, that was a stupid thing I bought?
Yeah, I can think of one in particular. I had a vehicle that had been in an accident, didn't get a whole lot back from the insurance company, and so my family offered to, in a way of helping me, gave me this truck that was breaking down and was really hurting. But if you could afford the repairs, it was yours for free, right? And we probably sunk 4 or 5 more times what it was worth in the span of the next several years, trying to just keep this thing running, until one day it just broke down so much that I was just like, you know what, it's not worth paying monthly bills to repair this truck, rather than just paying for a car note. I mean, and just even when we got the car, it had over 300,000 miles, and by the time we were done, it was about like a mile away from 400,000. I almost rolled it the last mile, but I just said, you know what, it can burn in hell. That's how I felt about that truck. So that was a huge one for me. Yeah.
Someone else?
There's no story after that. I've ordered a meal and then looked across the table and thought, oh, I should have got that one.
I am always, when I buy something, so when my husband was an officer in the Air Force, he was a lieutenant, we had to go to this big dinner with generals. I spent way more money than I ever should have spent on a dress for that event, because I needed to play the part, and it was so out of our price limit. We go to the dinner, and within 5 seconds of being there, I spilled cocktail sauce down the front of my dress. It was amazing. So totally ruined the image of, here I am, this classy lady in this great dress who can't even make the food go in her mouth. So it was great.
So with that, John, give us kind of this past weekend, you kind of the heart of the message and kind of what God was doing there.
Yeah. It's interesting when we put side by side what God has given us with the security He's given us, with the security that we want. And man, is there a night and day difference between those things. In fact, so much so that we read a text like 2 Peter 1, where you say He's given us everything that He requires for life and godliness. And you're kind of like, okay, like, thanks for nothing, God. Like, that's not what I wanted. It's you open up the gift on Christmas morning, you're like, well, that's not the thing I wanted. But it's so much better than what we desire. And likewise with, his guarantee in the future, the Ephesians 1 passage, we are promised an inheritance beyond compare. And when he says that, actually in that inheritance are the material things that we long for in this life. We will be physically resurrected in a new heavens and a new earth, and we will experience wealth as we've never experienced. No one's ever experienced on this earth. So there is that. But even greater than that is the presence of our God, is the presence of His perfected people. And it's funny what our hearts do in the middle of all of that stuff, right? Even in the midst of grappling with that, it just kind of feels like, thanks a lot, Granddad gave me money for my college tuition for Christmas. You're like, whoop-de-doo, I wanted such and such toy. Oh, but it's such a better gift than we could ever imagine. And actually, the gift itself is intended to shape our very hearts in terms of what security is to us. And the gap in my excitement for the gift God gives with the gap in my excitement for, the pay raise or the, the new house or the building up that retirement fund to X level, the gap in that doesn't reveal the deficiency in the inheritance and the guarantee and the security in Christ. It reveals how twisted my heart is and what I think actual security is, which is laughable, of course, because all of this stuff, when has that ever actually made any of us truly, in a sustained way, happy? We know it doesn't, and yet that's what our heart longs after, and God gives us so much better, something so much better.
John, in this life or in our world right now, like what what do you think we as humans usually try to cling to that gives us security?
Yeah. And it kind of is age dependent in some way, right? I think that there's those things that offer a teen security. I think about my kids, and they're very different, and kind of what that looks like for them. But often maybe it's a gaming system, or it's whatever. It's an entrance into a certain club, or it's a whatever it is, right? For a kid, again, it can be, a toy or a birthday party or any of those things, right? Now, the reality is as adults, it maybe looks a little bit more buttoned up, but let's be honest, like that, having that 401k at that threshold, that's nothing different than a birthday party. They're shaped in different ways, but they're shaped kind of in that same thing. And so I think our hearts long for those things that feel tangible to us, and so much of it is rooted in, and so much of the series is rooted in this comparison game. We see that neighbor, we know that uncle, and we're like, that's it. If I just get that, we have a friend in high school, whatever. You think, if that was just the case for me, then I'd be happy. And it's a lie.
Typically, where it's students or if it's adults, three negative driving forces that have this for that conversation are discontentment, greed, maybe even debt in reality too. And so I'll start with maybe ask you, Kim, like, what is discontentment and what's the problem with that?
I think discontentment is just not being okay with what you have, not being contented in your heart with what God has provided for you and what you have, where your status in life is, what things you have in your life, where your security lays. And so the discontentment is just wanting to pursue those things, wanting more. It's still that seeking worldly things rather than being comfortable with where you are. And contentment can only be found in Christ, and recognizing that you're secure in Him, that you have everything you need, that you are who you are based on what He's given you and what's provided for you, and that the things of the world that you're longing for through discontentment isn't going to change.
Discontentment, that comes out in lots of different ways. It could be stuff, it could be a status, it could be a number you're trying to reach. It's all those things. And so, but you text, so what about greed? What is greed, and what's the problem with that?
Yeah, I think greed and gluttony are actually a thing that are pretty closely related in this conversation. I think where, like, gluttony is this non-insatiable wanting more, I think greed is really that same exact thing, except just with money and with cash and wanting more and more and more. And I think this is something we wrestle with. I can remember one of my first jobs and coming home making $350 a month as an intern and going, gosh, like, I don't know how we're going to make bills meet, and even being asked one day to move across town, and being there 5 days a week at this job, making very little money, and having to wrestle through, could I even afford to go back and forth to my college for the gas and rent, insurance, and going, like, numbers just don't add up. And I remember praying, like, what if I could make just a little more? And it's funny how God kind of answered that prayer, where He gave me some roommates who allowed me to just sleep on a futon in their living room free 5 days a week, where that wasn't me making more money. God really changed my perspective in my heart of saying, like, I will provide those things. It made me think of Paul, really. In Philippians 4:13, we quote this all the time. It says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. But if you backed up just a hair, Paul kind of talks about his life, and he sets up this moment of saying, like, I know what it's like to live in plenty, and I know what it's like to live in want. And I know that in all these things, I can do everything through Christ who strengthens me. And it was one of those moments for me. I was like, man, whether I'm on a futon, or whether I'm, poor and broke, or whether God's allowed me to have a little bit more, like, I know that He's going to take care of me. And realizing more money is not the answer. More of Jesus changes my heart and my perspective on that, though.
I think, Greg, maybe the other one I would say is debt. And so that's a negative driving force in us feeling secure. So, like, what is debt, and why is that a problem?
So first, all of these are related to really just not knowing that God is our provider. Yeah. If we knew that, if we could live with a childlike faith of knowing my future is secure. My future is secure. I'm going to eat tomorrow. God is taking care of me. We can rest in that. But I would say debt ultimately a very small percentage, it can be a tool to leverage for business purposes in this world. That is not necessarily wrong. But the overwhelming majority of debt is people saying, God, what you are providing is not enough, so I'm going to reject you as my provider, and I am going to live beyond my means. I want more than what my provision is. And so you just start charging up. And you can do it for a while until it catches up and it becomes a bondage. Yeah. And most Americans have at least some form of bondage in their life.
John, I'm going to ask you this question. It's easy for us, discontentment, greed, debt, to live there, and that's where we find our security. That's what we find our identity in that. And so compare those three things to kind of back what you said earlier of finding that God is our provider, that we find our security in Him, and how do we kind of walk through that?
Yeah, that's really good. There's so much great stuff that you three said. I specifically thinking about what you said, Greg, about debt. And debt is us cashing in our tomorrow for today. And what's awesome, spiritually speaking, is that actually that is what we have in Jesus Christ. We have our security, our ultimate security, back to Ephesians 1, right? We have our fundamental security in Him. Will you cash that out today? Because we can. We can cash out the joy of that today. We can cash out the contentment of that today. We can reshape our heart in terms of our desires in that today. And the thing is when our hearts are shaped back and look like God, we find that everything is met. Everything is met in Jesus Christ. And there's no wants that we have that remain. So the question isn't so much, will God provide what I want? The question is, will I desire what God gives? And that changes everything.
Yeah. So as, use this as a context as you jump into these scriptures we give you and some questions, and continue to wrestle through who you are in Christ and how God is providing for you richly today. Enjoy your conversation.